This morning, I was giving a talk on the fundamental attitudes expressed in Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching. The title Tao Te Ching introduces the second word in the title and quote, Te, end quote. I've been discussing the first word, end quote, Tao, end quote, and now we come to the second word. This word presents some serious problems in translation. It's ordinarily translated as, end quote, virtue, end quote. But virtue, as we understand it today, isn't quite right. A closer meaning would be when we speak of the, end quote, healing virtues, end quote, of a plant. That's nearer to the meaning of this word, end quote, te, end quote. The Japanese pronounce it toku, the Cantonese duk, and the northern Mandarins approximately da. In the section of the Tao Te Ching where this word is introduced, the text says something like this: the superior virtue is not conscious of virtue, and thus it is virtue. Inferior virtue cannot let go of virtue, thus it is not virtue. We might paraphrase that as, end quote, superior virtue is not conscious of itself as virtue, and therefore it is virtue, but inferior virtue is so caught up with being virtuous that it's not truly virtue, end quote. Therefore, end quote, te, end quote, is a connection of virtue and magic. It means the excellence of things, like a tree excelling at being a tree. Nobody really knows how it does it. There's no way to imitate a tree. The only way is to be one. Similarly, when a person displays extraordinary skill, it seems natural, as if it isn't achieved through any forced effort. If there's any discipline in it, it's concealed. So, excelling in something naturally, almost as if by magic, is the essence of, end quote, te, end quote, te, end quote, then describes a person who has learned to live in harmony with the Tao. Of course, everything is fundamentally in harmony with the Tao. In the unwobbling pivot, it said, the Tao is that from which nothing can depart. What can depart from the Tao is not the Tao. You see, fundamentally, you can't escape it. Imagine we're all floating in a vast river. The river carries us along regardless. Some people in the river swim against it, yet they're still carried along. Others learn to swim with it, and they know they're being carried. They understand they're going with the flow, whereas those swimming against it think they're going in the opposite direction, but they're not. This was part of our discussion earlier, where I found that Americans often raise moral issues when we talk about these ideas. We are, as a people, heavily influenced by preachers and have chronic guilty consciences, so moral questions often arise. But this perspective helps us understand. You have to flow with the river. There's no other way. You can pretend to swim against it, but you're still going with the current. The person who isn't pretending anymore, who knows they're going with the river, suddenly finds that everything they do has the power of the river behind it. A person swimming against the current doesn't express the river's force, while one swimming with it has the entire river propelling them forward. The most skilled, like a sailor tacking against the wind, use the river's or wind's own power to move in the desired direction. This is Taoism in its highest form, using the forces of nature with intelligence. I remember once, outside, I picked up a thistledown. It looked as if it was struggling to get away, like an insect caught by one leg. But then I realized it wasn't struggling. It was the wind and the structure of the thistledown enabling it to move, letting the wind carry it naturally, with no effort of its own. This is the intelligence of, end quote, te, end quote, getting things to work with you without forcing them. It's a skill that doesn't demand others agree with you, but rather gives them the feeling the idea was their own. This art, often thought of as feminine, uses subtlety. For instance, a woman who truly wants a lover doesn't pursue him, for that would seem too aggressive. Instead, she creates a space, a kind of void, which makes her appear desirable and attracts interest without effort. Similarly, creating an air of difficulty or exclusivity can be a powerful strategy for gaining immense publicity. T. Lawrence's 7 Pillars of Wisdom, published initially as a limited edition, built tremendous anticipation before a general edition was released, becoming an immediate sensation. The Tao Te Ching, then, can be viewed in several ways. As a guide to mystical understanding, as a naturalistic handbook on the principles of nature, or even as a political treatise advocating for governance through non-interference. Imagine if the President of the United States were as unknown as the local sanitary inspector. This anonymous figure might do a more efficient job, free from constant interruptions and ceremonial obligations. In just the same way, our own bodies govern themselves best when we aren't constantly aware of them. On a deeper level, people can get in the way of their own lives by being overly aware of themselves. They lose the quality of and quote, te, end quote. The Taoists propose that we get back to the Tao and cultivate and quote, te and quote, by letting go of this self-awareness by fasting the heart. In Chinese, end quote, heart and quote, doesn't just mean the organ but also the mind, the psychic center. The best kind of end quote, heart end quote, is one that doesn't interfere, that operates as if it isn't there. Chuang-Tzu said that the highest form of person uses their mind like a mirror, grasping nothing and reflecting everything. The Taoist ideal is to operate as if one is absent, to be present without ego. Our own eyes, for example, cannot see our heads. They're focused outward, so the head remains a blank, free of color. The end quote, emptiness and quote, of one and hashtag 039, head, in this sense, is the condition of clear seeing. Meister Eckhart once said, end quote, because my eye has no color, it is able to discern color, end quote. This absence is the Taoist idea of, end quote, no mind, end quote, of being present by being absent. And yet, we often resist this idea, fearing that if we aren't self-aware, we'll miss out on life. We want to know that we know. But true fullness is being without self-consciousness, which allows for complete engagement in life. My limerick puts it like this. There was a young man who said, though it seems that I know, what I would like to see is the I that knows me. When I know that I know that I know. And this is the great human predicament. The development of self-consciousness, the development of the possibility of reflecting upon one's own knowledge. This is simultaneously a blessing and a curse. And Taoism does not escape this problem. I mean, it doesn't avoid this problem, it deals with it, but it doesn't deal with it obviously. So we get back to this fundamental verse about the nature of te. What is highly virtuous is a virtue that is not conscious of itself as virtue. The moment it's conscious of itself as such, you see, it fails. So in this way, we love to see a child dancing all by itself, lost in the dance and not performing for an audience. And we say, oh, if only I could dance like that. If only I could become like a child again, innocent. But then, when parents notice how beautifully a child dances and they all approve of it, they say to the child, dance for us. The child begins to lose this power and starts to perform. And we don't like that. We say, that's affectation. That's showing off. That's phony. What we want is for them to dance as if they had no audience, not even themselves. But this, of course, puts the child in a double bind, because it says, we require you to do something that will be acceptable only if you do it as if it wasn't required. We do that all the time to our children and to each other. You must love me. After all, you promised to do so when we got married. And so on. This is the difficulty. But somehow, a very great artist in the maturity of their life manages, at least, to give the impression that they do what they do without playing to the gallery, without self-consciousness. It seems perfectly natural. So, how does one get there? There was a Taoist sage later than Lao Tzu whose name was Li Tzu. We romanized that as Li. Li had a reputation for being able to ride on the wind, so light. And he says in one place, it's easy enough to stand still. The difficulty is to walk without touching the ground. Because in the state of being in accord with the Tao, there is a certain feeling of weightlessness, parallel to the weightlessness that people feel when they get into outer space or when they go deep into the ocean. This is, of course, connected with the sensation that you're not carrying your body around. I described this morning the sensation that an expert driver has when he is really with it in a car. The hill lifts him up and drops him down the other side. He and the road are all one process. That's equivalent to the sense of weightlessness. And so, this is connected. This is the inner meaning of riding on the wind. When Suzuki was asked, what is it like to have such Tao? He said, it's just like ordinary everyday experience, except about 2 inches off the ground. And so we say in our own songs, walking on air and never a care. Something is making me sing, tralalala, like a little bird in spring. A person who has mushin or no mind in Chinese is a very high order of person. It means that their psychic center doesn't get in its own way. It operates as if it wasn't there. Chuang Tzu says that the highest form of man uses his shin like a mirror. It grasps nothing. It refuses nothing. It receives but does not keep. And the poem says, when the geese fly over the water and they are not reflected in the water, the geese do not intend to cast a reflection, and the water has no mind to retain their image. So the whole thing is to operate in the world as if you were absent. This is the fundamental Taoist idea of being absent as a condition of being present, of being not there. Chuang Tzu says, when your belt is comfortable, you don't feel it. When your shoes are comfortable, it is as if you weren't wearing any. Likewise with your clothes. The more you are aware of these things, the less properly they are made, or the less properly they fit. But we raise an objection to this, a very simple objection. If I don't know I'm there, I seem to be missing everything. We want to know that we know. If we're happy and we don't know we're happy, we might just as well not be happy. To be happy and to know that you're happy is really the overflowing of the cup of life. Of course, the penalty for that is to be miserable and to know that you're miserable. Some people are miserable without knowing it. But, my limerick. There was a young man who said, though it seems that I know, what I would like to see is the I that knows me when I know that I know that I know. This is the great human predicament. The development of self-consciousness, the development of the possibility of reflecting upon one's own knowledge. And this is simultaneously a blessing and a curse.